Hello, my name is Forrest Palmer, and we have as our guest here today, and we're honored to have him, is Southbury's First Selectman Ed Edelson, who is going to discuss some of the things, problems and projects in Heritage Village and in Southbury, and with an emphasis on how Heritage Village relates to Southbury.
Thank you.
Yeah, Ed, here at Heritage Village, we plow our own roads and we have our own water supply and we do all of these things. And we frequently hear from residents that, what are we getting for our tax dollar? What are we getting for our tax dollar? And is it worth what we're paying? I'm sure that you've heard this and you must have views on it.
Oh, sure. And it's an important question, and everyone should always be asking to make sure they're getting value for their money. I do think that people here living in the village are getting their money's worth. It's worth reminding, and I think this is why a lot of people bring this up in the village, is the Heritage Village represents 25% of the residential units in town, which sounds like a big number. However, we should recognize that now, currently, Heritage Village represents less than 9%, 8.6% of the taxes that we raise. And that proportion has been going down. Some of that pretty dramatically in the last couple of years as a result of the revaluation.
Yes, indeed.
But still, people in the village are very important to us and the service we provide. The first one I'd point out would be the police service, which is a very big part of our budget. And I think you're well served by a police force that's attuned to the needs of Heritage Village and the population here, and I think provides excellent service, sometimes in some very difficult situations, difficult in the sense of the personalities involved and the different personal issues that come up, especially as people age. And a lot of people are aware of what happened here on July 19th. It was a very exciting evening. Might be the best choice of words, but a very strong presence by the police. There's also the fire service. Makes a lot of its calls, a high proportion of its calls are here to the residents of the village. It's a volunteer fire force in terms of the workforce, but all of the trucks, all of the equipment come from tax dollars. So we support that heavily. Ambulance, again, it's a volunteer service, but Southbury Ambulance and Heritage Village Ambulance are backed up by an arrangement we have with Campion, which provides paramedic services. And there again, we do that because of the unique population we have here in Southbury. Obviously, everybody uses our roads, parks, and trails. I hear lots of people in the village make good use of that. But what I think makes us unique here in Southbury with regard to Heritage Village is our senior center and our senior services. And that is really geared towards meeting the needs of this population as well as many others, with a wide range of programs, transportation services, and most importantly, counseling. And many people take advantage of the counseling services offered by the Senior Services Department.
Very good. No, there are a lot of services, and I'm sure that a lot of residents are not fully aware of them. But I've noticed that the leaders from Heritage Village and the town of Southbury, yourself, have been holding regular meetings for more than a year now. And I'm wondering, what do you see as the benefit of these, and do you think that they will continue?
Well, I really do believe they've been very beneficial both for the town and for the village. And I have a phrase that I like to use, which is you need to make your friends before you need them. And we've been tested as the town of Southbury and the village from several natural disasters and man-made disasters, maybe not disasters, but man-made situations. And I think the fact that I feel so comfortable that I can call up Fran or Kevin or Ron Conti and say, we need to talk about this, how do we work it out, comes from the fact that we've been meeting monthly, we've gotten to know each other, know what our concerns are, what their concerns are, so that when problems come up, we know immediately to call each other, talk it over, and see what we can do to help each other. And for example, when we had the snowstorm of October, where Heritage Village and the rest of the town had unprecedented amounts of snow, and it wasn't so much that you didn't have the equipment to push it, but it just piled up in places and you couldn't get rid of it. And so recognizing that was a unique need, we came in with some of our front-end loaders to actually physically move snow that had been plowed but was accumulating. And that was, based on conversations that I was having with Kevin at that time of how are things going, keeping in touch. But the latest, and I think the greatest example is the announcement yesterday with regard to a grant of $400,000 to help low and moderate income people remain in their homes. And that's very important to us because we want people to be able to live a quality life in their existing home. And we've come to be very aware, again, working with the leadership of Heritage Village, as well as members of the Civic Association, about people who have, because of their economic situation, life is getting very tough for them to stay in the village, or they can stay, but we want them to have a quality of life, meaning heating and air conditioning that's really reasonable for these units. And so our ability to get that grant was through a lot of collaboration between my office, the Senior Services Department, and people in the village. And I think that's why we were successful. So very, very pleased with that.
That sounds very encouraging, and it does. And do you think there is still more work to be done in this collaborative area?
Well, I very much do, and I would go and point back to some of the issues that have come up as we look at natural disasters and what could happen. And so the issue of sheltering keeps coming up. I mean, the number of people who live in the village and that are dependent on electricity is something that keeps coming to the top of our list. And so we're pretty good when it comes to sheltering 20 people, 50 people, up to 100 people. But if something would happen in the village and we had to shelter more than that because they couldn't stay in their homes for whatever the reason might be, that's something we need to work on a lot more. Another aspect to that, which I'd encourage people to take advantage of, is the self-identification of people who have emergency, or not emergency, but medical situations that require electricity. Because we want to know that if for any reason we're going to have a long power outage, those are the most important people we need to get to first. And if we don't know about them, there's not much that we can do. And so there are programs that, rather than use this time to go into them, but there are programs where people can self-identify in a confidential manner, so that if an emergency happens, we know to reach out to them to say, what can we do to help?
Are you doing that through your office or with the Civic Association? Or?
Well, we do it through our Senior Services Department, so that's the best place to contact. Or they can contact the police because they end up to be through the dispatch function, kind of the centerpiece for that.
So you will have
or through the Heritage Village, right? Or through Heritage Village services, social services.
Good. And there's always been talk about a sidewalk between the village and Southbury.
We're making progress.
We're making progress. What are you doing on this now?
Well, the board, well, as you might have seen, we have prepared the site along Poverty Road. And last night the board approved the vendor, the contractor who will do the work. So now that we've gone through the competitive bid process, which takes longer than I'd like it to take, we had to check out the references of the lowest bidder to make sure that even though it's the lowest bidder, it was still a quality bid. And we're comfortable now with that. It was approved last night, Thursday night, and the work should start. You should start mobilizing within the next 2 weeks.
Great.
And I would hope by mid-September we are done, and I'm looking forward to seeing you there at the ribbon cutting.
I'll be there.
And that should connect, from the heart of the village all the way through to the library. Then our next attempt, or next leg, if you will be from the library to Main Street. So we have ideas about trying to integrate the great sidewalks we have in town, which are called streetscape, so that becomes more integrated with Heritage Village as well as other parts of Southbury.
Well, that sounds very encouraging. It does indeed. In the past year, what accomplishments are you most proud of? I mean, I know you've been working and you've been talking to people here, and you certainly have a whole list of problems in the town of Southbury.
Right.
What are you most proud of?
Well, clearly I'm most proud of the work we did at the Southbury Training School. This is something that I really felt very deeply had to be addressed. And we really have made progress in three important areas. One, to get legislation finally passed to permanently preserve the farmlands, so it'll stay as farmlands. Two is to establish a task force that would look at the campus where all the buildings are and think about, once that closes, what comes next. Because we don't want to have that economic activity just come to a screeching halt. And we want to make sure we do our best to make sure that we can continue to use that area, because it's been a source of employment for people for many years. So that brings economic vitality. Every time people come in here, come there to work, they bring money that's used to support our local businesses. And the third is the conveyance, the legislation to enable conveyance of 45 acres for senior housing, low and moderate income senior housing, basically an expansion of Grace Meadows, which is just north here on Poverty Road. And many of us thought that would be many years before we could convince the state to give us that land, but it happened. Well, it has now happened. So all of those require more work, but we're very excited about the progress we've made.
Now that you have the land, how are the plans coming for putting the housing there?
Well, that's going to take some time and grant money. So the next steps are evaluation of the property, something called an environmental impact evaluation. We need to know exactly what has happened on that land. Some people know there are some housing units there, go back to the late 30s, early 40s. So we need to make sure there's no contamination of the soil, there are no other environmental risks, and if so, if there are, how we can address them. But by having the land, this allows the board, the nonprofit board that runs Grace Meadow, to now go and apply for grants. And there have been two that they've used in the past, and I think they would look at both of those. One from the U.S. Housing and Urban Development, and the others from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. But in order to apply to those grants for building, you first have to show you've got property. So that's why this was such a critical first step. So with the grants, then will come the architects and the planning to actually lay out the number of units and where they'd be, and the rest of the configuration.
Well, those are indeed, I think, impressive accomplishments, and certainly what has been done with the training, the Southbury Training School it's a legacy that will last for a long time. My friend Tom Kreider did a lot of work on that, as you know. Yes.
It's pretty clear to me that without somebody like Tom, we'd still be talking,
I think you're
as
right,
opposed to having legislation. So Tom deserves a huge amount of credit.
Well, now as you look down the road, what do you see as the biggest challenges for the town, and perhaps how it relates to Heritage Village, but particularly for the overall challenges that you see ahead?
Well, there are a number, some of them related to building on what we did at the training school. So it's one thing to get the lands preserved. Now we have to really work hard at encouraging young people, or really anybody, but young people to come and do farming up there. So we need to work with the state to make sure we have the plans in place that will encourage farming. I should say the plans and the policies in place that will encourage farming and good use of that land. So that's going to take a lot of work, and I look forward to working with the State Department of Agriculture to make that happen. The task force to look at the future will have our first meeting on August 29th, so I'm looking forward to getting that started. That too will take a lot of work to think creatively about the future and what kinds of opportunities that could mean for Southbury. And that leads to sort of the overall challenge that as a community, we are very residential based, and that means our tax burden really falls upon residents. And I think everyone sort of agrees that it would be better to get a little better balance between commercial and residential. The challenge is, how do you do that in a way that keeps our rural feel? We don't want to bring in factories, but how do we identify the kinds of commercial and business ventures that fit well within Southbury, that are environmentally acceptable to us, but at the same time really represent commercial real estate that can be used to broaden our tax base.
Well, that's a laudable goal, and I'm glad that steps are being taken to go toward it. It's because it's very difficult when the tax base is so heavily weighted on the residents.
Right.
Yeah.
And
it's also, bringing that in would also provide employment opportunities in the area too.
right. So all of that, is positive for us, especially now where we've seen, the residential market have so much still excess property, people who would like to sell their houses who aren't able to. That's created problems for our school system because people who normally would be moving possibly to a heritage village are kind of caught in their home because they can't afford to get out because the home value is below their mortgage. And so what I call is sort of a treadmill of the housing cycle of people moving up and changing homes. The fact that that's sort of come to a dead halt has created, I believe, some of the declines in enrollment we've seen in the schools.
Yes.
And what we're struggling with, the Region 15 is struggling with, is that a permanent change or is that a transitory phenomenon that will resolve itself in the next few years?
Very true.
And it's a big question mark.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you for all your views that you've expressed here, the information that you've given us. And I would say, by and large, that you have a very positive and optimistic outlook for Southbury and us folks who live here.
All right. And if I could just say, last night at our Board of Selectmen meeting, we did have a moment of silence for Don Briggs. We were all sorry to see his passing, but it was, I think, enlightening for everybody to realize how much service to the town of Southbury Don had provided as Board of Selectmen, other boards and commissions, his role with the dog park. And so I don't want to leave without saying how critical and important all of the volunteerism that the town receives from people from Heritage Village with their skills, their time, energy, and talent that they bring to Southbury and have helped to make this a much better community. So thank you to all of those people who've done that, and I encourage more to volunteer.
Good. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Good.
But shake your head.
Absolutely.